Welcome to Kitchen Table Finance, the podcast where we serve up bite-sized pieces of financial advice to simplify your money and your life. Join your hosts, David Shotwell and Nick Nauta, and let's get started.
Hey Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Nick. How are you?
Doing well. Well for a Monday. It's heat waves really hitting down here in Michigan. What are we at? 28, 29 degrees today?
Yeah. It's like within shouting distance of freezing.
The sun comes out, so that's good.
Yeah.
We got a important topic today, and I will apologize ahead of time because we are going to get a little bit technical with some of this.
Yeah.
But it's very good information, and it's a very welcome change as far as I'm concerned with what we're seeing, and that is the Michigan State University retirement plans now offer Roth options in both the 403B and 457 portion of the plan. And so that has some implications for retirement and retirement planning, which are very welcome, but they come with their own nuance and, how people decide to use these and what it's good for. And so I thought today we would just take a step back and start with just a brief explanation on what we mean when we say Roth contributions, and how that can be beneficial, and how you might want to hit pause before you decide to defer all of your money into the Roth option, right?
Right. And I'm kind of glad that we're getting to have this conversation. It's taken Michigan State a long time to add this to their plan.
Yeah.
On a high level, for those who aren't Michigan State employees, most 401k and 403b plans have added Roth options over the last, where are we going, like 10 years now?
Yeah, for sure.
Longer than that. Yeah. So, but, a little change in the law this year that kind of made it mandatory for plans to add a Roth option, kind of kicked it into gear for a couple of the big employers that we work with. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, in a nutshell, just kind of broad strokes overview, the Roth option gives you the ability to contribute to your retirement plan on an after-tax basis, meaning you don't get that tax deduction that you get from making pre-tax contributions, right? You pay the taxes now, that money goes in, and then it also grows tax deferred just like your pre-tax contributions. The difference is when you hit retirement age, you actually get to take distributions on a tax-free basis as long as you meet the requirements for that according to the plan. And so it gives you a potential other tool in your toolbox to start making some decisions on, do we want to do pre-tax? Do we want to pay the taxes now and have tax-free distributions potentially later? There's a lot of thinking that goes into that.
And also, it's not an either or proposition.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can blend these contributions together. You can make traditional pre-tax contributions for some of your contribution where it is deducted from your current year's taxes, and do Roth for part of it too. So lots of nuance.
Yeah, that's a great point, because oftentimes we do get stuck into this, well, I can do Roth, so I'll do everything into Roth, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing, which is helpful for a lot of people as they kind of think about that, especially as you're heading into retirement. If you haven't had this option before, it does open up some possibilities to play catch up with kind of having some of that tax-free money available in retirement. And so the other thing I wanted to do, Dave, is just really talk through why you might want to contribute to a Roth versus pre-tax, because I think, the Roth is this kind of, if you go on LinkedIn or if you go on, Twitter, people talk about Roths like it's this amazing account and everybody needs one and everybody should be putting all their money into it. And that's not always the case. There are some good reasons that we can claim to make Roth contributions, but it's not for everyone, and you have to really understand where you're at and what stage of retirement savings you're in before you make those decisions.
So,
obviously the big one that we talked about, the big benefit is you have those tax-free retirement withdrawals. So it really does give you some flexibility in how and where you're taking money from.
Well, to kind of frame up the decision, right? So the premise behind retirement plans originally and pre-tax contributions was for most people, you're paying higher tax rates while you're working and you have earned income.
Yep.
You're incentivized to then put that money in the plan and save some taxes now with the idea that it will grow tax deferred, which is great because you're compounding all those dollars. You're not paying, 15%, 10% every year. All of that money is compounding, so you get better growth. And then down the road in retirement, presumably the old math really was that you would be in a lower tax bracket during retirement and you're taking those monies out then and paying less in tax than you would have while you were working, right?
Right.
And it's not that like that premise is good, but only up to a point.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of things. One is tax brackets are now a lot flatter than they were historically, like back in the 80s when these plans were made, so that it was a bigger jump, a bigger drop off when your income dropped, what tax bracket you were in. Now it's relatively flat. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is what they didn't think about in the 80s or 90s or probably the people behind building the plans thought about this, but most Americans did not, was that in the process, you were going to accumulate enough in pre-tax retirement accounts that when you were in retirement and were relying on those funds, you were going to end up in a higher tax bracket anyway.
Right.
Because you're taking those out and just replacing your income. So the Roth is really an answer to that in a way. And so really the question kind of comes, one part of the question is, do you anticipate being in a higher tax bracket in the future or a lower tax bracket?
Right.
And, again, that has to do with your current income versus your retirement income and what those sources are. It has to do with what's Congress going to do with tax rates between now and then.
Right.
And then, what's the market going to do? How much are those accounts going to grow? So none of these things are things we can actually say with any certainty how that's going to look, right? So that's part of it. And so then enter the Roth with the idea that you can put money away post-tax. You don't get the incentive to put it in right now, but it grows and provides tax-free retirement income.
Right.
And who doesn't like that, right? I've yet to have somebody say, "Boy, I really regret putting that money in Roth."
Yeah.
so there's that part of the equation too. So how do you go about making this decision?
Yeah, it really is. What it comes down to, and kind of back to your point about just tax planning in general. The goal of tax planning is to pay taxes at the lowest rate possible, right?
Well, I would say the lowest average rate over your lifetime possible.
Sure.
But same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little more specific.
So in thinking that, to your point earlier, Dave, it's pretty easy for us to kind of project what your current tax rate is. It's very easy for us to tell you what your tax rate was last year because you did your taxes. We know exactly what it is. It's pretty easy to project it this year. It's very hard to figure out what it's going to be throughout your entire retirement, right? And so in thinking through that, there is some decisions that you have to make. And it really comes down to, tax diversification of if you have everything in one pre-tax account and all of your retirement savings, and that's the money you're pulling off of, you don't have a lot of choices, right? You're either going to pull that money to use it, or you're going to decide not to use it for X, Y, Z reason and pull less until you reach required minimum distribution age, when the IRS will tell you exactly what your minimum distribution is. And then you really don't have any your only choice there is to take that minimum or to take more, right?
Yeah.
But in general, I think people fear this a little bit more than is necessary, because most of the people that we work with do have some time post-retirement, pre-required minimum distribution, where you can actually do some tax planning and do some conversions and things like that. So it's not all is lost if you're 65 and everything's in a pre-tax retirement account. There is some time there to potentially do some things. But in general, if you were going to come to me at 65, my ideal would be you've got pre-tax retirement accounts, you've got Roth accounts, you've got maybe even after-tax accounts, because that allows us to really zone in on where you want to be tax-wise and make the best decisions. And you have a lot of different buckets. And the thing that people don't always realize is if you're retiring at 65, you got a really good chance of having a 20 to 30 year retirement. And so we have a lot of years to potentially look at what those options are and what might be going on. And your tax rates are going to change and tax code's going to change. A lot of things are going to change. And if we have diversification we have got money in each of those different buckets, it allows us to much better align what you're actually having in taxable income, because we have different sources to pull from.
Exactly. Diversify your tax treatment of your portfolio the same way you diversify the actual investment holdings. Yeah.
So a couple other notes about the benefits of the Roth. There are no required minimum distributions like in the pre-tax account. So that's a little bit of a benefit. You don't have to take that money out if you don't want to. You do have some access, depending on the plan, when we're talking about plan contributions, to take out those contributions without taxes and penalties if you're not of that age, potentially. And a lot of that depends on the plan itself. Unlike if you have a Roth IRA, if you're eligible to contribute for that, you do have access to those. And we can talk a little bit too about the difference between Roth IRA contributions and Roth plan contributions. The other big benefit that kind of comes into this as well is long-term. If you have money left over in your Roth account, that does transfer to your heirs income tax-free. There's still, for some of us lucky enough to have over, was it 15 million now? There is still, a potential estate tax issue, but for most of us, those will transfer tax-free to your heirs. So that's another benefit, just thinking about how and when you're going to use this money as well.
Right.
A little bit like we talked about as well, Dave, is why you might not want to contribute. If you know for sure, if you're getting close to retirement, you know that your future tax rates will be lower, then you probably don't want to make these Roth contributions. And then the other thing as well is you might not have the ability to pay the taxes now, right? And so if you're contributing $1,000 a month pre-tax, if you change that to $1,000 a month Roth, it's going to change your paycheck by more than what you're currently contributing, right? It'd be like almost like, because you're contributing that tax portion, you're contributing more, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And we've talked about trying to determine if your tax rate is going to be higher or lower in retirement. And I don't want to go too far into this, but I think you saw last week there was some fresh research out from one of our trusted sources. And I'm not going to go into the details, but basically showing the math that it is, if you're going to be in the same tax bracket in retirement, you're probably better making pre-tax contributions. So, which didn't seem quite as cut and dry as it may sound.
Yeah, and I think, people get really worried about tax rates going up. And I guess the counter argument to that, especially for retirees, is they haven't really seen a big increase. And I don't know that Congress wants to go after the largest voting population with increases to taxes there. So I don't know that there's that much pressure.
Middle-class retirees are not likely to bear the brunt of any future tax increases. Doesn't mean no tax increases, but on a relative basis, that's probably not going to be the fun
stuff you have to kind of take into consideration, right? And think about as you're making these decisions. And one of the, I'll go back to the earlier point you made too, but you don't have to do everything, right? It makes sense if you're doing 15% right now, that maybe you peel off 5% and do Roth or something like that, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to do all 15%.
Yeah. Or if you're younger in your career and you're making a little less now, maybe be a little heavier in Roth contributions now, and then, adjust that as you hit your stride in your higher earning years. and start crossing those thresholds into higher tax brackets, then that's the time to lean more into the pre-tax traditional contributions. Another aspect of that is to remember that usually, although this is something that can now change, but I've not seen a company institute this yet, employer contributions, and this is important for the Michigan State plan to kind of come back where we started, employer contributions are generally going to be pre-tax.
Right.
And so, like in the Michigan State plan and the University of Michigan plan, that means 10% every year is being put in that will be treated as it's not your money, it's the university's money, but it will be treated as pre-tax when you get to retirement too. So
it's another thing to think about when you think, if you wanted to do 50% pre-tax, 50% Roth, right? Like the university contribution, their 10% is already pre-tax, so
right?
Which a little bit heavier on the Roth side. Actually, a great transition because the MSU plan's a little bit different in that there's really three main parts, right? We've got the 403 base program, the 403B base program. It's a little bit of tongue twister. But that one is where you can contribute up to 5% of salary, although often this is mandatory. And you don't have a Roth option, right? So that is all pre-tax. That's your first 5% of contributions. And that's how you get the matching university contribution of 10% as a 2-for-1, right?
Right.
And so that one is going to be pre-tax. You can't change that. The parts that you can potentially change are the 403B base supplemental program, where you can choose Roth or pre-tax, and that one has a $24,500 annual max. And that also includes the money that you're putting into the 403B base program. And then there is the 457B deferred compensation plan, and this is separate from the 403B in terms of counting towards that 24,500 max. And so we see people using this a lot if they're heavy contributors and getting over those annual limits.
Right.
Allows them to essentially have a little bit more in contributions, well, double actually, which can be very helpful for high income folks that want to defer a lot.
Yeah, if you're saving
and this one is also both pre-tax and Roth. You have the option there as well.
The way I think would be useful to think about the difference between the 403B base and the supplemental program is because your total between the two is 24,500, unless you're over 50, which we'll get to in a minute. But it's like you fill up the first 5% of your salary fills up the 403B base. And then anything above that, up to the 24,500 total, would be into the supplemental.
Right.
And then the 457 is like a completely different plan that you can, then have that whole other limit on. It's the potential to save in the Michigan State retirement plan is pretty impressive, actually. Yeah.
Not a lot of companies offer both the 403B and the 457.
Right.
You can do a total of almost $50,000 a year.
It's crazy
between the two plans. So that can be potentially very helpful. So with that, Dave, one of the things, and what sparked not only this conversation, but also the fact that we're talking about it at all, is that there's been some changes to rules as it relates to people 50 and over and making what the IRS deems catch-up contributions. You want to walk us through kind of what that means and what the changes are?
Oh, sure. So if you're over 50, then your limits to the plans go up by another $8,000 a year. And so that's true for the 403B and the 457 plans. If your income this year will be over $150,000, then that $8,000 extra needs to be a Roth contribution.
Right.
You no longer get that choice. That's a new wrinkle this year. And that's what triggered Michigan State adding the Roth options. So yeah, another little wrinkle to consider there as you're for me. So for some folks, this actually makes the whole thing easier, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I get over 24,500, then it has to go into Roth, and I no
Right.
longer have to sweat about whether I'm doing the right thing or not. With the idea that I guess if we're going to be good financial planners, we should always be encouraging people to put more into their plans instead of less.
Sure.
So, so we'll start there. But
yeah, well, it's an interesting decision point too, because like we said, most companies offer just a general 401k. But the decision point becomes, let's say you're contributing to the 403b, you hit the 24.5, then you say, okay, I can make these extra contributions Roth, or I can flip over and just start making pre-tax contributions in 457 up until 24.5.
Yes.
Not a lot of people get over the $50,000 mark where, you're getting into having to potentially, and for Michigan State faculty and staff, to have to decide or to have to make Roth contributions. But realistically, you don't have to as an employee until you hit I keep calling it 50, but technically it's 49,000 of pre-tax contributions before you're forced to, if you want to keep contributing, do Roth in either the 403b or the 457 plan.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is that little bit of wiggle room there for most. Yeah. Because most people are not maxing out both plans.
Right.
So, yeah.
So, but it makes for an interesting, conversation around if you do get to that point, you do have to make those Roth contributions. And there's some planning implications that obviously go along with that, right? In general, if you're 50 to 65, you're usually in some of your highest earning years. And so that may push you into higher brackets. So you have a higher likelihood of potentially dropping down a tax bracket or two in retirement.
Yes.
For some people, it might discourage extra retirement savings.
Yeah, I think most people where this is going to actually apply, it's probably not a deal breaker one way or the other, but true. I know when we talk to younger people that are just getting started, that idea of the tax incentive seems a little more important than it probably should, given their tax brackets. So, it does encourage participation in the plans in general. So,
yeah. So, I think that where you have to start thinking about this is going all the way back to the beginning and just deciding before we get into any of the catch-up stuff or anything like that, is just trying to figure out what you're paying in taxes right now, right? Like you should know your marginal tax rate. Are you in the 22% tax bracket? Are you in the 24% tax bracket? 32? Like, where are you at? And then trying to think through where you're likely to be at in the future if things stay the same. If those have a major gap, right, then it will allow you to lean one way or the other, right? Like if you're in the 32% tax bracket, but in retirement you're going to be in the 12% tax bracket, that makes the math a lot easier, right?
Right.
But if you're in the 22% tax bracket and you're probably going to be in the 22% tax bracket when you retire, then it's a little bit more difficult to kind of determine that. But I think that's a great starting point for people as this option is now available. Just first figuring out, lay the groundwork. Where are you at? Where are you likely to be at? And then start having some of those decisions around what is my overall makeup of how much do I have in pre-tax, how much do I have in Roth, have I been able to contribute to a Roth IRA outside of this, I already have some of that, and just kind of figuring out that next step of kind of where things stand.
Sure.
And that hopefully kind of points you into a direction of, okay, it makes sense to start doing, and I can afford to start doing some more Roth 403b, 457 contributions.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, when we talk about discouraging retirement savings, I'm pretty sure you'll agree with me. It's not necessarily the tax savings or losing the tax savings that will discourage people. It's having to sit down and think about this.
Yeah.
And so that I think worries me more, is that people will have decision fatigue here, or just be frozen by the idea that they've got to try to figure this out. And so, while we've tried to lay out a framework to think about it here, at the end of the day, don't let this stop you from making retirement plan contributions, right? Yeah. Above and beyond the 5% mandatory amount that you may have.
I mean, more important than any decision we talked about today is, on the top of your priority list, is, am I saving
make money? Yeah, make contributions
before you even think about worrying about where should you be saving.
Right. And that's important to not let that get lost in all the mumbo jumbo technicalities here. Make the contributions, invest them properly.
Right.
You're probably not going to change your life one way or the other by how close you are on the proper percentage of Roth versus traditional contributions.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. It does get very complex, especially depending on, how much you want to try to predict what the future is what holds for you. And so, I wish I had a quick and easy, like, hey, if this applies to you, do this. But it really is very subjective. It depends a lot on your situation. There's a lot of different factors that go into that. So if it's something that you're concerned about, or something you want to have a larger conversation about, feel free to reach out to us. That's what we're here for. That's what, the joys of you and I every day is getting to look at this stuff and help people figure it out. But also, to your point, Dave, I think the bigger takeaway is, it's much more important to be saving the right amount than it is to be worrying about, should it be Roth or pre-tax. Like, that's kind of a next level type of conversation. And so, don't let it worry you so much that you decide not to contribute.
Don't lose the forest for the trees.
It's all pre-tax, like, you're going to be fine. These are good problems to have when you get to this point where you're sorting through where the money's coming from and what the best way to implement it is. So
great.
With that, Dave, it's been a pleasure.
Always fun.
As always.
Fun. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you for joining us for another chat about your retirement and finances. Please hit that subscribe button. You can also contact us at srbadvisors.com or email us at info@srbadvisors.com. See you next time on Kitchen Table Finance.